Hello, everyone, and welcome to our MOLA Virtual Vancouver digital presentation. This is entitled Opera for Symphony Librarians, Basic Tips to Help Demystify and Create a Plan of Attack. We had originally been slated to present this live and in person at the MOLA annual conference in Vancouver, Canada in June 2020. However, of course, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, everything has moved to a digital platform instead to help protect all of our members and because travel is not possible right now. So we would like to thank MOLA for the opportunity to move all of these presentations into a digital format to share on our website so that we continue our mission of education and professional development in the field of performance librarianship. So welcome and thank you for joining us today.
That's great. Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for asking me to be part of this. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think between the two of us, we have varied experience doing this and a lot to share with orchestral librarians. And if they have any questions or thoughts, I think we'll be able to answer quite a lot. My name is Nancy Elbeck, and I am a music librarian, of course, but I started off as an oboe player and went to training as an oboe player and orchestral musician. And I became an orchestra librarian, just like many out there, which is sort of sideways, where I was asked to help out, and then it became something I wanted to do. And I've been the principal librarian of the Hamilton Philharmonic, which is in Ontario, Canada, also assistant librarian of the Buffalo Philharmonic, and now I am principal librarian of the National Arts Centre Orchestra in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and delighted to help fill you in on with my experience as an orchestral librarian who has had to put together operas. I had to put together operas in Hamilton for Opera Hamilton and Opera Ontario. I've done opera in concerts in Buffalo, and I've also done opera in Ottawa as well as Galas. So lots of experience there, and hopefully some anecdotal and practical help for you to get things put together. And Katie?
My name is Katie Somero, and I am currently a librarian with the Los Angeles Philharmonic, which I am very grateful and fortunate to have that position. It's new for me. But my background is I'm a clarinet player by training, and I had the chance to perform in opera, both contemporary and traditional Mozart operas and things, as a student and as a young professional working in Chicago. And like Nancy and so many other people in our field, I fell into the librarian work kind of haphazardly. I began as an academic librarian first for Northwestern University in Chicago, and then as a librarian for the Colburn School Conservatory of Music in Los Angeles. In both of those programs, I prepared opera, full productions, and also gala and excerpt programs. And that was interesting because I was preparing material for students that were not as familiar with performing operatic material. So they needed a little bit more time and information with the material than professionals that play opera all day, every day. Once I moved to Los Angeles and moved into the professional realm, I worked in, operatic productions for various regional orchestras, including excerpt programs and things. I was the head librarian for LA Opera for a few years, and previously, before being the head librarian, I had worked as a freelancer assistant there for a few years. Now, of course, LA Philharmonic, so symphonic librarian, but we do so many different productions, and we do, opera and excerpt programs and galas and things as well, and musical theater. One of the things that I learned the most from is I had worked as librarian for the Los Angeles Master Chorale, and we did programs like Great Opera and Film Choruses. So that's preparing excerpts for, largely studio musicians and also some opera players. But then also I worked for a few years for the Celebrity Opera Recital Series, which was at a concert hall in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica. And that was primarily studio players, but we had very prominent guest opera soloists. So, Anna Netrebko and Maestro Domingo and those type of people. And I did many, many of those over the years. So that's where I really learned a lot, because I was working remotely from my physical library and performing, preparing excerpts for that setting with very few rehearsals, with maestros that were coming in internationally, with, where I had very little access to them ahead of time, and you just had to be ready to go.
That's wonderful. That's fantastic experience. So great.
Learned on the fly with that.
Okay.
So let's move on to our, basically, with this session in general, we figure that people that are more established in the field are really more accustomed with preparing operatic material, and probably have their trusted colleagues that they can call and rely upon, and have their information sources and plans in place. So we really envision this to be a bit more for people that are newer to the field of performance librarianship, or newer to the task of preparing operatic material.
Right.
And we feel that typical opera libraries, and having been, a head librarian in that situation, tend to go into more of a deep dive with preparing operatic material, which is a real luxury, but that's also the nature of the beast. Everything has to be perfect, and you have more time and more advanced planning to be able to prepare at that level. So when we get into presenting this information for librarians that are primarily symphonic or academic in their experience, we understand that you have less time to put into this.
Absolutely.
Right, Nancy?
Yeah, absolutely. We were discussing this before we got together to do this for you. And the difference is just months and months and months of time, where orchestral librarians really are not given the information even that much in advance, maybe 6 months or the season before, but the actual time for preparation is far shorter, and you do not have the time to go as much into depth. But you do as much as you can possibly do, because you do have a production to put on, and it's up to you to make sure everything is as precise and put together and marked and everything. So you do. So
the material still has to be very correct and clear, and it still has to be prepared to a very high standard.
Right.
But of course, you wouldn't put the type of deep dive work into it that perhaps an opera librarian would have the opportunity to be able to do, right?
Right. You would do what you can, and you would try to do everything, but then you would figure out what you actually have time to do. And as long as the basics are accurate for your performance, then you'll be okay. But you got to do.
And one of the other real differences that I thought of is that an opera librarian would have the benefit of having a physical library with lots and lots of operatic material in it. So full scores, piano vocals, many different editions, that type of thing. And a symphonic librarian may not have the same type of resources sitting in front of them on the shelf to be able to reference.
Right.
So the level of research and preparation has to be a little bit different, because you don't have that physical resource to rely on in the same way.
So for an orchestral librarian, at least in my experience, every time you did an opera, unless it was a very commonly repeated opera, for instance, Marriage of Figaro or something like that, you would be really starting from scratch with that production, and you would have to research all the aspects of performance of that, and you really don't have the reference in your own library, so you have to go to others. Including, of course, the internet, but your friends, oh my gosh, your friends are the best. I don't know if I could have started doing that without having experienced friends who were willing to just lead me through it, and they make all the difference for your performance. But, yeah.
So this session today, of course, can't be an end-all, be-all textbook on how to opera, no. but we do, because it's such a broad field, but we do hope that we can provide some basic tips and some basic tricks and advice to help get one organized, and to help save time, and to help tackle a project like a full opera production, a full concert opera, or an excerpt program efficiently, and within the time frame and parameters that you may have as a symphonic or an academic librarian.
Right. So we have a checklist here that we've already talked about. The first one, which is nobody should opera alone. If you're on your own, reach out. Reach out to those who are more knowledgeable and will be delighted. In the library world, everyone is truly happy to help each other. It's a wonderful community. You ask about certain productions, say, is there a certain aria that they traditionally like to do in a different key in this particular opera? Anything that is out of the ordinary that you would not find from just having the music arrive in your library, you need to know. Also,
sometimes the best way for someone to find out about any major pitfalls would be to identify somebody that is familiar with the material or has performed it previously, and they can say, oh yeah, red flag, make sure you know about this aria that has to be inserted or whatever. And opera librarians in general are of course very busy people, like we all are, but they understand, I think, at least I felt in my experience and in with my wonderful colleagues and friends in the other opera companies, that it's very unique material and very specialized, and so through experience they're able to amass a lot of specialized information that is just kind of learned through experience. And I think there's a culture of wanting to share, so avoid calling someone up and saying, hey, do you have the music for this?
No.
Give it to you. No. But you'll find very friendly people with lots of specialized information that are happy to share.
Right. So it says, who else has done this opera or this particular production recently? So that would involve where did the maestro conduct it last, or where did the director work last on it? And was there someone there at that organization that could share information with you? You have to ask about any issues they had, any cut lists that you will need to know, any changes, inserts, etc. That's all fairly common sense, but you need to ask, because
and that's not to say that it will be exactly the same for your production, but it's very good to have that information as a starting point. And particularly if it exists somewhere else, or the prominent soloist or director that you're dealing with has done this elsewhere, find out what they did before as a starting point so that you're educated.
Right. And sometimes, not to cast aspersions, but sometimes managements are a little slow to get you the information that would help you do your job in advance. So this is sometimes gives you a leg up on what they're going to give you, but they haven't given it to you yet. And you can say, oh, I found this information. Is this accurate? And they are, oh, yeah, I'll check into that for you, because they hadn't yet.
Being proactive.
Yes, it's very helpful. Very helpful.
And with experience working with operatic material, you'll find that it's by nature quite long. It's very multifaceted. There are often different versions of even a single opera.
Yeah.
And there are just a lot of variables with this material that I think are not perhaps as common in symphonic material, right? If you're going to buy, Beethoven 3 Eroica set or something, you're going to have the music that you need to play, right? But with opera, you don't know if it's the Italian version or the Paris version, or there's just a lot of variables in play here. So, and that's where looking into which edition can be very important here, because there may be many different editions, and those may actually include different music. And it's important to work with, if you have the luxury of having music staff, artistic planner, pianist, rehearsal pianist, that type of thing, determining what is your official piano vocal score for this production, because different scores can often contain different music. So make sure that you are working with one unified score as much as possible.
Okay, absolutely. And the next that goes right into how will this information that you get, the official piano score, but the cuts, all that, how that will be distributed to the cast, crew, the music director, even if there's questions there, it has to, all the information has to be shared right across the board, so that there isn't a last minute, wait a minute, that's not what I agreed to, or, oh, didn't you know about the whatever, insert, cut, key change, aria, rewritten, all of that.
And it'll depend on your particular organization, I think, how that information is actually distributed.
Right.
So it's good to figure that out in advance. Is it the job of the library to actually send out that information to artists and crew? Is it the job of a music administrator? You know, at an opera, you would have an opera company, you would have a company manager, or, you know, a rehearsal scheduler or something like that, that would typically be in contact with all of these various participants in the opera, right? And so in a symphonic setting, I think it's particularly important to identify who has the contact info for all of these people and who is going to be in charge of physically sending them this information in advance so that they have the right score, they have the right cuts.
Right. So I find in my experience, usually it's a music administrator, but with any kind of new information that I get, I communicate that again with the administrator, but also the head of production, because it could involve the stage director, it could involve crew activity for the stage setting. For the orchestra redistributing, you know, somebody's going to play off stage, all of a sudden last minute we didn't know, this person has to go into the wings and the crew has to know this, and, you know, all these things. So I include production, the head of production usually, in anything that could involve them, so that everybody's on the same page and there are no surprises.
Your stage manager will very much want to know. And
Absolutely.
particularly, this leads to the next question. Is this production that you're presenting, is it fully staged? Is it semi-staged, or is it a concert version? You're going to have very different parameters depending on what's actually intended for this performance. So is this a fully staged production where you have sets, you have a costume designer, you have you know, a stage manager for the actual production, you have a director, all these types of things? Is it semi-staged where you have some of those elements but not all of them? Or is it just a strict concert performance where you're going to have an orchestra on stage, you're going to have soloists standing at music stands and singing the roles as though they're just singing any, you know, concert work, oratorio, or whatever you have? So that is very important to find out in advance, because then that will tell you, you know, who all is involved in this thing and how many people am I working with on this production.
That's exactly right. Are you working with the full chorus and minor soloists and the major soloists? And also this, we're going to just jump right down here to any recording, broadcast, streaming. That's very important as to the fully staged, semi-staged, or concert version. If you're renting, or even if you're not, you would need to know if there's any kind of technical aspect to this, broadcast or streaming, that involves permissions. And then who asks those? Do you ask them, or does your administrator ask that? And you must ask that question. You must find out if they think you're responsible or hadn't thought about it at all.
And there could be some surprises there as well. If you're dealing with, you know, an opera that is in the public domain from a music standpoint, but the particular edition that you choose, for example, a Baron-Reiter critical edition, is only available on a rental basis, you want to be very careful with that, because maybe a music administrator wouldn't know that, yes, the music is Mozart, but we signed a contract saying that we need to actually get permission and pay any associated fees for a radio broadcast, right, or for an internet stream, particularly in the days of COVID. It feels funny, Nancy, to be talking about opera performances during coronavirus.
It does feel a little strange, although if, you know, we're paying attention to what's going on in the world and we can see more and more things starting to happen. So yes, it will be a thing, and recording and streaming is going to be part of our lives for a long time. So important to keep that right at the top of your attention.
And publishers and finance departments really appreciate it if you are able to anticipate these requirements and costs in advance. Exactly. And if it's not something that you're accustomed to dealing with, it's good to have a heads up on that, to make sure that you build that into your budget and make sure that you anticipate it.
So also we have just about where to obtain the music. Is it a set that has already been performed with this music director, and it's already got the markings that they like to do for this production? Important to find out where that would be, and is it available for you to use? If not, well, first of all, if you already own a set, you would probably use that and mark it to the music director's wishes. But I have to say, in my case, we have borrowed a lot of opera music from other opera companies that are willing to loan. And that would be sort of not the major opera companies. They don't give away their music, not normally, or even rent it. But some of the medium-sized opera companies who have enough that they can own sets of music are willing to loan them. And that's been invaluable. That's just been fantastic for a smaller organization that can't afford to buy operas, because they're very expensive. And if you're dealing
maybe doesn't need to have an entire opera set sitting on the shelf for something that you're performing, once in the summer for maybe 1 or 2 nights.
Right.
It may not make financial sense or logistical shelf space sense to have that entire opera set and set of choral scores sitting on your shelf for eternity.
Yeah, exactly. That's always a big problem, space in your library. So exactly right. And
particularly working with a regional orchestra or an academic orchestra, perhaps budgetary concerns could come into play for that. And so, even looking to resources such as some public libraries have wonderful collections of material, or there are people that we will speak about later that rent out full opera sets that are prepared, right. Or perhaps rent out print masters or that type of thing. So that there are a variety of options to consider before you even get the music in the building.
Absolutely.
And some music is only available on a rental basis, of course. So if that's the case, identify.
Yes, you may have no choice, actually, in that case too. We just quickly, if it's under copyright, we touched on that, but you need to find out small rights, meaning it's opera in concert and nobody's doing anything. Semi-stage, there still can be grand rights if they go a little nuts. And full,
meaning stage, lighting, costumes, stage.
Yes, and little nuts meaning
extra musical elements, right?
This is something I have found many times where I'm told it's a concert version, but all of a sudden we've got little tables and chairs and hats and costumes and drinks of wine and toasts and all this stuff, which makes it semi-staged. It's not a concert version. You may not find that out until they get into rehearsal, but.
That's about doing your research within your organization. What is anticipated and what is intended for this performance, right? And if it does get into a grand right situation, there are contracts and negotiations associated with that, and it's important to identify within your organization, is it the obligation of the library and the librarian to negotiate and secure that agreement, or at your particular organization, does your music administrator or upper management or something prefer to handle that type of discussion and negotiation? So just be clear whose responsibility it is, to make sure you know what you should be doing.
Great. I think we should move on to the next page.
So this is, we kind of designed this to be preparing the material. So we spoke about what to do before the music even gets to your building, right? Now we're talking about what to do once you've figured out how to get it and you've received it and it's here in your library, right? So preparing the material for a complete opera.
Right. So for me, I would always put out there, when can I get the music? They would say, when do you need it? I say, how soon can you get it to me? Because sometimes if you're borrowing a set, maybe nobody else is playing from that set for 8 months before you need it, and it will be just sitting on their shelf. And so I'd say, if it's all right with you, please send it now. Please send it as soon as you can. I'll take good care of it, but we will have it in our hands and we can have time to put in the markings.
And because opera is very long by nature, preparing it is of course more time consuming than some other things, and we've already spoken about having limited time or resources perhaps to dedicate to this. So I think it's very important to make sure that you find out with your particular organization, are there any deadlines stipulated in your collective bargaining agreement or in any other documentation about when the players actually expect to receive the parts in hand, and also taking into consideration along with that, if you have a chorus, when does the chorus expect to receive that material? When does the rehearsal pianist expect to receive that material? That type of thing. So because it's kind of it can be a long-term project in the planning, making sure you're keeping track of what those deadlines are and when do all these people need to have this stuff.
Right. And so we're going to move fairly quickly through this because we have talked a lot but not gotten through what we need to. So we're going to go just a little faster. But I will say, just keep in mind a tip for preparing string parts, because that's going to be what takes most of your time, other than putting cuts and inserts into all parts, depending on what's needed. But bow a violin one part, mark it, time yourself, and then judge accordingly. The rest of the violin ones will take that long.
It very well could take a couple of hours to mark one single string
part. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
if you start doing the math on it, you know you need to be working on this weeks in advance in order to not get carpal tunnel syndrome. You know, I mean, because you're so stressed trying to get it done quickly. You know,
right.
you got to pace yourself, and you time things, and you find out how long it takes to do, and then you ask for help.
Right.
You need
and
it.
many times with operatic material, it's unusual. It's becoming more common, I think, but it's unusual traditionally for there to be errata lists for complete operas, just because they're so long and there are so many errors. Operatic material is known for having a lot of issues with it, right? So it can be very helpful if you have to prepare a clean set to find someone perhaps that can loan you, even if you're not allowed to play off of it. Is there a set where you could go and sit in their library for an afternoon and you could, do a quick proof against their played set, just to find wrong notes or to find, transposition errors or that type of thing? That can be really helpful because you don't have the same resources sometimes with errata lists and things. Also, if you have access to the maestro and you can talk with him or her in advance, find out which actual score does he or she have, and what are they actually planning to use. Do you need to provide something for them? And find out, does that score match the piano vocal score and the parts that you intend to use? Because as we mentioned, there can be, a flute solo missing or something. So sometimes if the maestro comes with a critical score, it's not necessarily the end of the world. You just need to be able to identify what the differences are. Just make sure that you have examined it and that you're all on the same page. So there are no surprises.
and that includes all the normal things that you would make sure with score and parts, which is rehearsal letters and bar numbers, all the things so they match. Hopefully you don't have to write them in for the opera, but sometimes you do.
And many times a critical score will come with bar numbers, and the public domain parts that you're using have printed rehearsal figures, so there are pitfalls there. So just know that you really need to examine that material, and don't assume that whatever someone shows up with is going to work just because it's the same piece, right?
Right, and inform the maestro what he or she is dealing with. If he has all the rehearsal numbers and bar numbers, let him know or her know that the parts will not match, but they do have the rehearsal letters, and they can mark them, because sometimes these scores come with numbers and bar numbers, no letters. They can put the letters in their score, or we can do it for them to match the orchestral parts.
Similar to various symphonies, but I think particularly important for operatic material, because if you're dealing with a full opera production, the maestro is standing on the podium trying to coordinate so many more people than in a typical symphonic setting. So they're dealing with the singers on stage, the chorus, the stage managers, everybody. So it's all the more important to pay attention to those type of details that perhaps you could muddle through easier in strict symphonic performance. But when you have all these different players and entities, it becomes more complex. So,
but you do what you can.
One thing that go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you do what you can. I have played in operas, and I have provided music for operas where it was not possible to get it all together. And you do have a maestro saying, okay, we're starting at the second allegro after the tenor sings, okay, everybody got it? Yeah, all right, fine. And it can work, but it takes a lot of time. You try not to make that be a possibility. But,
so two techniques that I learned through, performance librarians learn through apprenticeship, right? We learn through experience, trial and error, but we learn through apprenticeship. Two things that I learned that were really helpful to me, that I think could also be helpful to people in being efficient, is if you are in a situation where you're having to make a lot of changes, you're having to, you know, adjust dynamics, you're having to reorchestrate a bit, or, you know, cuts, that type of thing. Create an Excel chart for reference for yourself with those edits, but also so that other people can help you, because many times there are lots of changes at the last minute or lots of adjustments during the rehearsal process. And if you have everything written in a list that's clear and easy to follow, rather than just in the maestro's score that you may or may not be able to borrow through the rehearsal break, that can be very helpful to, number one, document what you've done, but also so that you can hand it to, you know, your assistant or a hired hand or whoever happens to step in to help you mark those changes. That can be very helpful just to keep you organized. And then also, sometimes it's beneficial when you're comparing all these materials to create a quick list or a chart of the rehearsal figures, because that's a good way to make sure that they line up, and that can help save you time when you're trying to proofread or whatever, or do your quick, you know, check for errors. Or if you get in a situation where you're in rehearsal and someone doesn't have letter J, it's so much quicker to just reference your chart and say, okay, J is, you know, 14 bars after letter I or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Yeah, and then of course with opera we have banda, offstage or onstage music. Offstage singing or acting can be possible, and also sound effects such as thunder or bells or gunshots or all these types of things. Operatic material, of course, is in many different languages oftentimes, and so these things will be hidden in the score, and they'll be in a different language that you didn't necessarily take the time to translate, and all of a sudden you're in rehearsal and someone says, hey, where's the gunshot? What gunshot? Who's supposed to play it? How do we do that? You know, so take the time to do that research, and that can be a good way also to call a friend and just to ask, hey, you know, what did you do for the banda? How did you guys deal with this offstage bagpipe? Did you use a synthesizer, or did you actually hire a bagpiper or whatever? You know, these are good questions to ask. And banda, of course, we'll talk about a bit later, but it can depend. At the time, it was written for whoever lived in the town and whatever instruments they had. And so you'll get this set of banda parts, and they'll be in strange keys for, or you know, archaic instruments that don't necessarily exist anymore. And there'll be like 37 parts. And of course, you're not going to do that for your performance. So you may need an arrangement. It may be helpful to call another company and say, you know, have you made an arrangement? What was the instrumentation you used? Did it work? Can I rent it from you? Or, you know, find that out.
Right, right. Or, and as well, with an experienced maestro and knowing your orchestra. So you may not have a huge orchestra, and you may not have the budget to hire these extra players to play this little ditty of banda that's only a very brief moment, or maybe a recurring moment, but in the opera, but it's still, they will say, okay, what I really need here are the violins, I need the trumpets, I need the tuba, or the Oxfleet, or whatever, for Verdi, but and bass drum, and everybody else is sort of covered, so don't worry about it. And
there are also instances where there's offstage music that is traditional to perform from the pit, because, you know, players don't have enough time to get up on stage, or it's just not worth it, or whatever. So it can be common to write a percussion cue into the part that's in the pit, but it's very common for that music to not be included in the percussion parts for the orchestral players. So make sure you know about these special sound effects or elements, and find out, you know, are they going to be performed from somewhere else, or are we going to try to write them into the pit parts? Is it possible to do that? You know, make a plan.
Right, and this again comes into the production, letting them know when you find out you have banda, and they again are going to be back behind the pit, or they're going to be up on stage, or they're going to be backstage. So up behind the production with a separate conductor or something. These are things production needs to know, and that you're going to be supplying music and players are going to be up there. So
of course, and the librarian needs to know so that they can set the music that needs to be there, or, you know, distribute it to the players that are being hired. You know, these are all very important production elements that need to be anticipated in advance. So along those lines, it's very important with opera in general, particularly with a full production like this, to work ahead as much as possible. You may feel that you have a lot of time left before the first rehearsal. However, many times with these productions, the chorus or the cast is coming in before the first orchestra rehearsal, and they're doing staging rehearsals or choral rehearsals, and that's where lots of things can pop up sometimes where people need a change, or they need a transposition, or they need a different cut or something to accommodate timing on stage or a dance or something. And if you are still trying to get bowings in at that moment, you are not available to incorporate these changes that they need at the last minute. So make sure that you take the time to get done what you can when you can, so that when these surprises pop up, you can deal with it, or hire, you know, an assistant or something.
Right. So I would say, in my experience, the rehearsals, the soloist rehearsals with the maestro and the rehearsal piano usually started a couple of weeks before any kind of orchestral rehearsal. The soloist would come into town, and that's when things would get hashed out, and they would find out, no, it didn't work to have this particular thing, and they would do more cuts, or they would add some material back in. So that, Katie's exactly right. You have to be ready to jump in and make those changes. And if you're busy doing the scut work of bowing, sort of the basic, then you're already behind the game. So if that's 2 weeks in advance, then that's 2 weeks before the players get the parts. You really should have that ready for any kind of changes that come your way.
Anticipate some last minute surprises.
Yeah, and they will. They always happen. It's you know, live music, real live people who have different physical issues, and director brilliant ideas that come in at the last minute that change things, and they, you know, that's the way it is. All right, let's move on. Quick.
Absolutely. You know, many libraries are moving now towards more digital preparation. So of course we still have hand manuscript. You know, you can still pull out your manuscript paper and your pen and you know, make that quick insert or that type of thing. But many libraries are moving more towards digital preparation. So I've found in my experience, particularly for opera, image editing software such as Photoshop, Adobe Acrobat, or InDesign. There's a program called GIMP that I'm not personally familiar with, but I know that a lot of people use it as a more cost-effective option rather than a full Photoshop suite. This can be used for many things. Operatic material, you know, sometimes you're dealing with old plates, you know, countless reprints of recorded material, that type of thing. And, you know, the image quality is a multi-generation copy. So you can use, you know, with public domain material, you can create a good quality scan, and you can use this, you know, digital preparation aid to improve the quality of the image, improve the darkness of the image. You can actually move music around just like you would cut and paste, fix bad page turns. You can actually make room to put in an insert or, you know, errata correction with the digital editing software. Say there's a flute solo missing and you need to, you know, make an insert of that and actually make space for it and put it in. You can do that. And also, if you want to get really in depth, you can add or correct rehearsal figures digitally. So rather than pen and ink and having to draw little boxes and everything, you can actually go ahead in your photo editing software and add in your rehearsal figures or bar numbers or whatever.
Very clean looking, very clean, easy for the players to read, which is what we're trying to do here.
And notation software, you know, whatever you may use, Finale, Sibelius, Dorico, MuseScore is a free open source option that's available that produces very nice results. You can also do, you know, engraved inserts. Sometimes with old plates, you'll have printing errors where you'll have a clef that looks like a squashed bug and you can't actually read it. Or, you know, on the old plates, they had to go in by hand and insert some music and they squished it in this little space and you can't actually read it.
Right.
So you can, you know, make a nice, you know, engraved thing. You can also fix bad page turns that way. Transpositions, of course, are common with opera. Sometimes you'll need an aria in a different key. So, you know, are you doing that in-house with notation software? Are you hiring a copyist? And of course, as we mentioned previously, banda arrangements. So it is very common to, you know, make a reduced banda arrangement or something and to engrave parts for that. And to make a score, because a lot of times the score doesn't come with the banda material. So
yes, quite often. Also in the transpositions, I just want to say, if there's a certain aria that's in a different key, ask somebody. They may have done it already. They may have this transposition already. Save yourself a whole lot of grief if it exists already, because you're already trying to do so much for this opera. Anything you can do to give you a reliable source of a transposition that you know is done well then
And that
I
circles
have
back to
definitely done that. I have absolutely done that.
if the artist has done it previously. And many times these are very common transpositions. So yeah, absolutely reach out, phone a friend.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's move
onto the fun, magical world of opera galas, recitals, and excerpt programs.
Yay.
Hooray!
Yay.
So, you know, this is a very special beast. I think people are, many symphonic librarians and academic librarians are so accustomed to doing galas or, you know, New Year's Day, Vienna waltz programs, that type of thing. Because of the way that operatic material functions and because of all the variables, of course, it gets complicated when you're dealing with vocal music. So there are pitfalls here, and it's good to have a plan in advance. So we'll talk through some just kind of basic, quick tips to help you make a plan. First of all, just know and accept that the program continues to evolve up through the show. You won't really know what is the final program until the performance is over, of course. So
you hope to know that you have all the right material on hand. This is what you hope and just beg to know all the right information, so that if they do a lot of shift, that you at least can say, oh yes, we've got that. We're ready. We're ready to go.
Changes and adjustments are common with this type of program.
Right, because you're dealing with usually some very gifted singers who may or may not be feeling it on that particular day or whatever, and they say, you know, I'd rather do this aria, or you know, I'd rather not do it third in the program. I think I want it second on the second half, you know, and you just be aware. Now,
they're dealing with international travel, and of course their instrument is their voice, right? So they're dealing with physical limitations. If someone were to catch a cold on the plane, maybe that aria isn't going to work when they arrive. So be prepared and anticipate changes, and that's why communication is really key. Make sure that you speak with your artistic planners early. Even if they're telling you they don't have a program yet, it's possible that they may have a draft program. They may not want anyone to know about that, and they especially don't want the public to know about it. Right. But you should make an effort to insert yourself into the planning process and the chain of information. Promise that you won't tell anybody about the plans that are not finalized, and let them know that it really, really helps you to have as much time as possible to source and obtain these excerpts and to research them and make sure that you have all the music that they're expecting to play. Even if it's not finalized yet, you need to be doing that research and putting together those background arrangements to physically get the music there. And that's very difficult to do at the drop of a hat.
Right. So I think I'm just going to jump down. Well, I want you to say what Bob Sutherland has said, because he is sort of, Bob I've known for many years, and he is just this unbelievable guru as far as opera goes, and maybe a few other things too, but so helpful. But he has some pretty acerbic sayings. He's a
recently retired chief librarian of the Metropolitan Opera, of course, Robert Sutherland.
That's right. That's
created, Robert's rules for opera galas, documents and things that we all enjoy so much. His famous saying that we attribute to him is starts, stops, cuts, and keys. Particularly with this excerpt program setting, no matter where someone has done an excerpt before, they may do it differently when they come to you. No matter what the tradition is for where to start this thing or how to end it, it may be different when it comes to you. They may sing it in a different key. Maybe they had a chorus when they did it in Russia, but they don't have one in the US, and so you have to cut that choral section. No matter what, you need to ask these questions about every single excerpt, because they will vary.
That's right. And I'm not sure, is this where we want to talk about if you're doing cuts or a start and stop, make sure you have the material on either side of stop and start available on the sheet in case you were not given the right information. So if you're trying to be tidy with your excerpt and say start at letter A, go to 5 after C, and it turns out it's the 12 bars before A and it goes to E, you need to have that material available. So don't be too clever with your edits. Make sure you
I'll mention that on the next page for sure, but it's
yeah,
good to
okay.
build in
All
some
right.
build in some flexibility with your plan as you're building these excerpts, because even if their management tells you something in advance, they could get there and have a different idea at the day of the rehearsal. So make sure that you have that flexibility built in.
Right.
In order to organize information for a program like this, I found that it's critical to make an Excel show sheet and track the repertoire, the preliminary instrumentation, and all the roadmaps. And as the program changes and goes through different permutations of finalization, make sure that you're saving anything that was deleted, because it may very well come back. Before you even get the music in the house, if you're working with a Gala program, you may be working with a different sized orchestra than normal for your organization. You may be required to be tracking information about, are there extra players, you know, that type of thing. So you'll want to do your research as best you can to figure out preliminary instrumentation, but then once you get the materials in-house, fine-tooth comb, figure out every detail of who needs to play this, right?
For sure.
So,
And red flag, if you're working with a smaller orchestra, a smaller budget, red flag any major orchestral sizes. For instance, if they're going to do a Verdi excerpt and it's got, you know, everything in it, or Wagner with tuba.
or most of the program is Mozart, and then all of a sudden there's Puccini with triple winds. Right,
exactly. So you red flag it. You red flag it for management and your personnel, and say, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Do you realize that they had programmed?
Because it's a mixed program and you're doing different selections from different works, they could vary in size quite a bit. And so that even comes down to the level of, you know, where do we put this on the program, because this requires extra players. Do they come for the second half? Are they sitting on stage the whole time? So it's communication is very important there.
Yes, I know what the answer is normally is. They're being paid for the whole thing. They'll play when they need to. No.
Depending on your orchestra, right? I've worked with many regional orchestras where it's per service, and you know, they
for the rehearsals. For
you know,
sure.
if you're dealing with a contract where people are on salary and they need to be there anyway, that's one thing. But if you're dealing with a contractor situation or an educational setting where, you know, maybe you don't have that third trumpet player, it's important to keep.
Actually, that's the case with, I think, all orchestras. If you have extra players, you try not to have them show up too many times when they're not really needed. So
one thing that I think is great is that we live in the internet age, right? So we have access to wonderful recordings and wonderful, you know, research capabilities at the drop of a hat that did not exist previously. So I think putting on this type of program now and having to conduct research as a librarian has become more accessible because of YouTube and Spotify and that type of thing.
Right. I would say that has my life. I have bridged that gap from cut and paste librarian. I mean, literally cut and paste kindergarten librarian to high-tech librarian, where all the automatic thing is, I need to look this up. Okay, click, 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 click. Not the books, not the papers. So much. You go to that when you're finally done. You go, you pull the research off, but it's so quick to get research across the world on what you're trying to do.
So in the planning stages for this type of program, it's very important to think, you know, have you worked with this particular artist before? If not, can you or your artistic team get in touch with their manager to ask the specifics, the starts, stops, cuts, and keys, tongue twister, you know, and do some research on this particular excerpt or aria, and do some research on this particular artist if you can. See if maybe there is a video that's recent of them singing this in concert performance. Where did they start it? Can you tell what key it's in? You know, what kind of setup did they have? That type of thing. Also, when you're working with an aria program, I think because you're dealing with many times singers and people with a vocal background that are very familiar with the lingo and terminology of opera, they'll come in and they'll say, oh yeah, we want to do the flower song, or the flower duet, or the champagne aria, or the champagne chorus, or the jewel song, or the this and that. And it'll be some programmatic title that doesn't appear anywhere on the music and doesn't reference at all the composer or the work that it's actually from, right? So or on the other situation, you'll have someone come in and they'll rattle off a title to you in French very quickly that you're not familiar with. And they'll say, yeah, we want to do da-da-da-da-da-da. You say, Come again? What was that? So there's a arias, ensembles, and choruses book that we'll reference later in our resources page. But there is a title index in the back of that book that is a lifesaver if you have someone come in and say, yes, I would like to do the Jewel song. What on earth is that? Look it up. So, and also I think we like to appear very knowledgeable. We like to appear very resourceful. But this is a situation where it's very important to make sure that you understood them and that you are able to get the music that they're actually talking about and start it in the right place. So I've found in my own experience, if they come in and rattle off something quick in French and your primary language, foreign language is German, don't be afraid to say, what was that? Could you please write that down so that I can look it up later? Because you really need to know where they intend to start this thing.
Right, right. So
and the title that they rattle off could refer to the starting point of the actual number within the larger opera, but it also could refer to a particular line in the recitative that precedes the actual number, and that's where they're intending to start. And if you just buy an excerpt from Galas, that may not include that additional material, right, introductory material that they're anticipating on singing.
Yeah, exactly right. And that is actually a really good point, Katie, that when you, if you go to Lux, or not Calmus anymore, but places that supply already excerpted opera arias, quite often they do not include the extra recit material or the lead-in material or the chorus. That 4 bars of chorus that was the lead-in into the aria, that it turns out they do want to do that. You know,
and that may be a traditional starting point,
right,
but may not be included traditionally in material. And if you're a symphonic librarian that isn't dealing with a large, collection of material on site, you may not physically have those extra 4 bars, and you may not have a score where you can quickly look and say, what are those 4 bars before this thing started? What is that music? So that's the research that's very important, I think,
right,
here.
Right.
Yeah. And along those lines, if you're dealing with an artist, do they have their own personal librarian? Many established traveling artists have the luxury of having a personal librarian that has their material in their preferred keys, that's ready to go, that is their preferred excerpt. Or you can find out, did they just do this in New York and now they're coming to you?
Yeah, that's right. Very good.
What did they do there?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and of course, copyrighted material comes into all this, and making sure that everything is very, properly licensed. If you're being sent some arrangements, make sure that those are all cleared properly. And also with this ARIA program, make sure if you're dealing with music that's under copyright, that there aren't extra musical elements planned, costumes or lighting or something that you did not know about. And again, of course, recording, streaming, broadcast, all that type of thing, make sure that you're securing that licensing.
There you go.
So now you've figured out what the program is, hopefully. You've gotten this music physically in the house. What do you do?
Well, it looks like, yeah, you need to find out the details on every single one for each singer and what they're going to sing, what their plan is, what do they, so we were talking about this. Does he or she sing the recit? How much? And you know what? Sometimes they say no. And then they get into the spirit of it in rehearsal. And they say, yes, you know what? Let's do that. Or, yeah, sort of like, let's put on this concert. And the librarians have to, all of a sudden you scramble. So you need to ask as many of those questions in advance
and some selections, of course, are very clear, like we mentioned, it's this number and that's it. And some you may need to anticipate leaving a little extra material at the beginning or at the end to build in that flexibility, like we discussed.
Right.
Yeah.
And that ties into also purchasing or renting excerpts, confirm they contain the actual music you need. And I have run into that where I have received an excerpt and it turned out I did need to go to the actual opera, full opera, to excerpt the aria, to have all the the proper orchestration, because sometimes you have little arrangements that they altered it slightly. Where solos
or to go to your preferred music dealer, be it Lux or Lauren Keyser now, or whatever the case may be, Serenissima, and inquire, where does that excerpt actually start? Or if maybe they don't offer the excerpt, but they offer full opera material, can they make the excerpt for you and sell it to you? Is that something that they're willing to offer? Many times, if you have enough time, that can be a way to source this material. And many times with excerpts, it's possible that because this is a chunk of a larger work, there may not be a lovely put a button on it concert ending already built in. So do you need to add a chord at the end to wrap it up, or does the music work as actually it appears on the page?
Right.
For a concert performance.
And generally, the conductor would have a good idea of what they want to have there. This is, again, something you would talk to the conductor about. How do you want this to end? And they would say, okay, let's see.
And as we discussed, titles can really vary for this. The way that artists or artistic planners or conductors may refer to these excerpts may be different than what the physical title is on the music. So if you're making an excerpt or if you're buying something, make sure that you're calling it the same thing on the sheet, the show sheet that you're putting in the folders. Make sure the actual music says something that the conductor will call out and everybody will know, oh yeah, this is that excerpt, right? You unify those titles so that people can go through quickly and find the correct music.
Okay. Yeah. I guess so. When you get a rental part and it's called something totally different than what the singer calls it, I find it good to have both titles on the running sheet.
Absolutely, right. Yeah, so, identify it clearly, agree on something, or just be clear, right?
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. And with this type of program, as we talked about, maybe you're dealing with reductions in instrumentation. So as soon as you get that music in the house, as soon as you get those excerpts there, or you get your hands on scores, physically page through those parts and find out, oh my gosh, tuba only has one note in this entire program.
That's right.
That's when you go through and you consult with the maestro, the personnel manager, the contractor, whatever, and let them know that information and let them determine how they would like to proceed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this next one, I think you wanted to talk about this next offstage music, sound effects.
Absolutely, yeah. We have the same concerns here as we do in full productions. There could be offstage music, there could be sound effects that occur in these excerpts. Is there chorus? Does your program actually have chorus or not? Are there other characters? Say you're performing a duet and you have, two soloists hired, and all of a sudden there's a third character that enters in this scene. Do you just omit that, or is there a plan to cover that some other way? There's a very good example. The Pagliacci bell chorus is a common excerpt if you're doing a program with chorus, and there is an oboe solo that's marked in the full score, oboe sul palco, oboe on stage, right? It doesn't appear in the actual oboe parts for the pit, but it's an important part of the end of this excerpt, right? So you need to make sure that you see that full score and take that solo and stick it into your oboe part, for the performer on the stage or, in the pit or whatever the case may be. Also with the Pagliacci, that's another example where, we call it the bell chorus, but nothing in the piano vocal score or the full score or the orchestral parts says bell chorus on it. There are different ways to refer to wherever that excerpt begins. And actually it's common to have an orchestral intro that's 4 bars before the andiamo title that people may refer to it as, where the chorus actually starts singing. So it's a good example for pitfalls.
That's great. That's great. That's wonderful. I'm hearing it in my head.
Dealing with the physical conductor, right? Dealing with the conductor and the physical materials that he or she may need.
Right. So every conductor has their own comfort zone for doing these kind of concerts. Some like to have the scores put together into a book that they can just take out the whole book, first half, second half, whatever, and just flip page to page. A lot do not, because of the flexibility of the concert, and when things can change, they don't want to take their score apart or be flipping and look awkward on stage. So they usually have, how many? What are we talking? 25, sometimes 25, 30 little numbers that go in.
Maybe 15 to, something, right?
It's crazy. So they like to have their scores. And it was always my responsibility, and I think Katie too, to put the scores on stage, and you make sure they're in order. But then you also do things like, say, there's so many little scores, they need a discard stand or a separate little table or something to be able to conduct, move it over. And it's important to pay attention to that kind of thing to help the maestro to feel comfortable as well with the setup.
It's a fast-paced and challenging situation for the conductor and the performers, right? So we need to do what we can to anticipate their needs and to make them comfortable during this program where they have a big folder of parts and they have a big stack of scores and they need to move through them quickly, and, you know, make sure to ask about their preferences in advance to help make sure they're comfortable. And if there needs to be a score discard table on stage or something, work with your stage manager to provide that for them. And, you know, you may have a situation also where there's a conductor that has their own personal scores, or you have, you know, material that's in copyright or that type of thing, where, you know, they're using their own personal physical scores. Do you need to help them mark the starts and stops, the cuts, that type of thing? Is it important for them to have, is this a work they've performed many times and it's important for them to have their own personal markings in their own personal score? Just find out what they're anticipating and try to be helpful, of course, as we always do, right?
Right. I would say in my experience, almost always the conductors like to be hands-on with their own markings. So you have to make sure you all are clear about, you know, you double check with the maestro about cuts, starts, stops, compare their scores to what you have on hand to match your set, to make sure their scores that they brought into town actually do coincide with the markings in the set that the orchestra is going to be playing from. And if not, then you can help mark up their scores to match rehearsal letters or bar numbers or whatever beforehand, so there's not a scramble or an awkwardness on stage.
And sometimes if you have a guest, they'll fly in and, you know, that very afternoon they have a rehearsal, and, you know, if you didn't ask, perhaps you wouldn't know that they need an entire stack of excerpt scores delivered to their hotel or whatever. So
yay. Well, you try to have a set or at least masters on hand to cover these kind of situations. And I've definitely had conductors take a look at my stack and say, you know, I'm going to use this one. I'll take this one, you know, great. And then you just say to yourself, get it back from them after and, and say, sure, go ahead. That's fine. But,
of course, or maybe a copyrighted rental that they couldn't receive in advance, you know, you'll need to help with them with that, of course. So, and then encores are so common for a production like this because it's a big flashy show, right? So you could have a list of, you know, 6 to 10 encores that they may choose from, and you have to have all those prepared and ready to go. You know, are these all confirmed? Do we know the order that it's going to be? Are they going to be selected from the stage? You know, make sure that your orchestra is aware of the situation and that they're ready to listen and, you know, grab the right excerpt and have it ready when the conductor maybe whispers to them on stage during the concert which one they're going to do, right?
Right. Yeah, that's it. And that's just to fly by the seat of your pants. Be ready to go. They would have been rehearsed. It's just a matter of, and hopefully they will know by dress rehearsal what's really going to happen. I mean, unless, of course, somebody's all of a sudden not feeling well, in which case there may not be that encore at all. You know,
or sometimes the show went long and the audience maybe only wants one encore, or maybe they had a fantastic show and people are going nuts and they're going to play all 6 of them, or you just don't know.
Or do it again. Right.
Or do it again. Yep. Yep. So, and then I don't know if you've ever come across this with this type of program, but I've had to provide material for teleprompters, for super titles, for piano rehearsals, rehearsal pianists. So I have found it in my experience very helpful to always make sure that you have a piano vocal score book or score master or you know, stack of scores ready, marked with cuts, ready to go, because you may be at the last minute dealing with you know, additional staff that you may or may not have known you would be dealing with, and all of a sudden, hey, where's the scores for the pianist?
And I have had that. I have also had that happen, and we're all, you know, there's a stage manager who will want something, but maybe you didn't even know there was going to be a special stage manager until the last minute. Usually with these, there is somebody to say go, 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 and they need to have the score to read from, usually a PV score. But you're right, to have the masters on hand to just be able to run them off for when you're given that last minute instruction, so that you are not holding up the production or the rehearsals or anything.
I always try to make sure I have some extras, because with opera in general, you never know when a cover singer is going to show up, or a cover conductor, or
Right.
you know, a recording engineer or something like this, and all of a sudden they need scores and you don't have them ready and marked with cuts. It's always good to have some extras on hand.
Right. Yep. Yep. I agree. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Fun stuff. So very, very, very briefly, digital preparation, of course, comes into this as well, but in a slightly different way for arias and excerpts. If you're working with public domain material, again, make great scans. It can be really helpful. Of course, you can do the cut and paste and, you know, paste on your titles and that type of thing. But it can be very nice to make extractions with image editing software, like we discussed, for putting on those unified titles. If you're making an excerpt, just with audition excerpts also, we mentioned, Nancy, right?
Yeah.
You know, make sure that the composer name appears on this. Make sure that the correct instrument, the correct key, clefs, key signatures, tempo indication.
So this is the kind of thing that's easy to when you go into the middle of a page of music and you start cutting and taking that material, it's easy to miss that the key signature changed 2 bars before that part that you did, or even right before, but you cut it away, you don't have it. You have to include it. Key signatures, tempo indications, absolutely. And also for the brass players, you know,
horn and trumpet keys, of course.
What key are they playing in?
Right, and especially for opera, it can be unusual horn keys, horn and law, that type of thing. Right. And also, many times you'll have instrument doubling within the woodwinds. And so if you're purchasing an excerpt or you're making an excerpt, make sure you're really checking, is that second flute on flute or are they on piccolo there? And make sure they know which one they should perform.
Right, right. Yes, right. You could be excerpting it and not actually put where it had just gone to piccolo earlier in the thing. Yes, absolutely.
And sometimes if you're making an excerpt, maybe you're cutting out a chunk of music and only one printed rehearsal figure appears in that entire passage, and that's just the way the cards fell. So do you need to talk with the maestro about adding in some additional figures, putting in some bar numbers, making sure he or she knows about those to make this excerpt functional in rehearsal?
Right. I have actually done that where I've included the last rehearsal letter and just had it in this sort of this music you don't play. So slashes through the music, but that's where it is as a reference to where things are. So, but you're right. Great idea.
So they can come back, And notation software, again, if you're making an insert or a concert ending, that can be very helpful if you need to, you know, insert a chord at the end or something like that. You can do it by hand, of course, but sometimes it's nice to engrave that. And then I've found in my experience, particularly with the traveling, you know, kind of off-site pickup gala and recital programs, for public domain works, can be extremely useful and extremely helpful to scan for backups and also for practice parts, because of the nature of this type of program, if the program is changing rapidly up until the first rehearsal, it can be difficult to allow players to take home folders a couple weeks in advance, and all of a sudden half the music they have has been canceled and they need 6 more selections. Right. So sometimes they'll be very happy to have a Dropbox or Google Drive or something with practice parts, and then you can actually retain those physical folders in-house so that they can be ready to go for that first rehearsal, and you can incorporate those changes that were taking place up until the last minute.
Right. When we were talking about this earlier, I also mentioned that we have a policy here, because we do have players that come in from out of town. We don't ever give our real parts to the players to take back to another city. They have to stay in town. If not, then the digital copies are perfect. They're perfect to be available. They're just right there for them. We have players now who are asking, can I do this all on my iPad? As long as it's public domain work, and that's their comfort zone to flip around on that. I don't know how well that would work for an aria and excerpt concert, but in this day and age, this is kind of some of the stuff we're being asked, because it's all.
And this is something as well where when you're dealing with rented material or copyrighted material, say there's a selection on the program that you had to rent from the publisher and that type of thing, you can't distribute scan and distribute that digitally. I've often referred musicians to the digital perusal score that's available on the publisher's website, for example. It's very easy for them to create their own quick little account and to be able to view that digital perusal score. You tell them, hey, just go to page whatever of the full score, and at least they can see if there's a big solo or
Right.
whatever that's anticipated.
That's a
then
very
they
good
can
idea.
arrange for you to come
That's
and
very
pick up
good.
the physical part if they need it. But yeah, it can be helpful to retain those folders if possible, to incorporate changes that come up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're kind of coming down to it. We've assembled some useful resources that are some, very common things that people are usually accustomed to using, and some things that are opera specific.
Right. Right. We are all in the orchestral world use Daniels as our Bible. Daniels orchestral music. It's been just fantastic. Great for the overtures, and as I see you have interludes down there too as well. Just a fantastic resource. Also, you have the arias, ensembles, and choruses. That's not a book I am actually all that familiar with, because of my not being an opera librarian per se, but that looks pretty great. Now I think I have to buy it. I know I'm having envy of the book, so I will buy it.
And many very experienced opera librarians and personal librarians for prominent artists, as we had discussed, went into planning for that book. And it'll give you kind of, the title index that I mentioned, but also it'll give you very important information on how to actually find that excerpt within the full score or the piano vocal. What are the various editions? What are the keys? It even drills into, information like I mentioned about the bell chorus and the offstage oboe. It'll give you a heads up on that, and it'll give you, important information on also possible reductions, like maybe the bass clarinet plays one note in this selection, that type of thing. So I find that to be a very helpful resource that people are constantly adding more to. So
no, that's fantastic. And the publisher catalogs and websites, which right online, and you can.
And sometimes it's nice still to have that physical, Lux catalog sitting on your desk or whatever to look up those programmatic titles or that type of thing.
Right. If you're fortunate enough to be in a library that has collected these over the years from the different publishers, they are fantastic resources to go into.
Absolutely. And finding material for rent that way as well. Yeah, very helpful. Symphonia, of course, great for opera, great for everything.
Symphonia is fantastic.
Of course, many times IMSLP, you can even find full piano vocal scores, particularly for reference. That can be extremely helpful if you need to look up information on an excerpt or instrumentation.
You can find full piano vocals. You can find full opera scores. The whole bit, and I have done that. They're very, very good reference. They're very helpful there.
Absolutely. There's a resource that's called Opera Base. This is subscription based only, so it may be less common to have access to it, but within an opera company that was helpful for me to be able to look up past performances of works, recent performances, and production specific information. This production with this director was done in February in, Madrid or whatever.
Right. Fantastic. Yeah. That's great.
And you have experience with the Mapleson collection, right?
Right. So when I first started in this side of the music biz, I did have to, I did access music through Mapleson collection when it was in New Jersey. They were actually standalone. They were on their own company. So helpful. Had lots of arias and excerpts that you would have trouble finding. They had lots. Well, now that resides at Educational Music Services and Music Service, and they have that cataloged on their website. You can look through the Mapleson collection there and see what they have. And if you're having trouble finding something, don't overlook that. It's amazing what they've got there and available for rent. It's just great. So. And
of course, all the helpful information by phone or email with Don and Carla and Fern.
Oh my God, they know so much. They know so much. So yeah, they're wonderful.
Very generous with their information. So performing rights organizations websites can be helpful in tracking down things sometimes. I found particularly, the Spanish equivalent of ASCAP, BMI, SOCAN is SGAE. And if you're dealing with zarzuela titles, which I find to be very common on excerpt and aria programs in particular, they represent critical editions of many of those works, and they can be very helpful with sourcing that and providing information on those.
Okay.
And then, of course, there are private collections, as we mentioned, various librarians that have become curators of these. So they are our dear friends and extremely busy people, but extremely knowledgeable as well. So people like David Karp and Jose Duplantier with the Crow, formerly the John Grandy collection,
Right.
Rosemary Summers, of course, and Paul Beck with Renee Fleming's collection. They are just walking encyclopedias and kind people and a wealth of knowledge. So I've had the benefit of having a chance to, ask for their expertise many different times over the years, and I'm grateful and appreciative. So I think that is in the realm of librarians sharing this information.
Right, and these are people who are really quite happy to share their knowledge. They are extremely knowledgeable. It's just very, very wonderful to have that kind of connection.
And many of them, of course, also offer, excerpts on a rental or for sale basis, or they offer masters, or they offer rentals of full opera parts, or, based on the specifics of their particular collection.
Yeah.
Can't recommend enough reaching out for their advice.
Yeah, I agree.
And then, of course, within the organization of MOLA, we have the benefit of being able to search the forum and the resource sharing part of the website and the forum. That's available at mola-inc.org. And there's a wealth of information and knowledge there. And that's also a great place to ask questions of your colleagues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, I don't know if my last slide is going to come up.
Uh-oh. Well, I'll have to make it up. There you go. After the performance.
Make sure you document any pertinent information because you will not remember it later.
Well, it's too much. It's too much. But you will want it for when you have to go back 3 years later and you say, what did we do? You want it. You want it all.
And you also will want to be able to help your colleague that calls you up a year later and says, hey, we're doing such and such production, or hey, your maestro's coming here, or we're doing this gala program with this soloist that I saw you did it with. You'll want to be a good neighbor and be able to share that information that you've documented, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, of course, if it's small rights for your performance, you'll want to report any of that, if there's music under copyright, to the performing rights organizations per whatever your agreement is. If it's grand rights, I find that maybe in opera companies, it's more common to do a percentage of gross box office receipts that are due following the production, whereas maybe in a symphonic or educational setting, it may be more common to negotiate a flat fee up front.
I think I've had both. I've had what's your house size? What do you anticipate selling, and what are the ticket prices? That's definitely quite common.
Right. So in either scenario, make sure that you're communicating with your finance department to make sure that you're reporting any information to the publishers and the rights holders that's required, and helping to facilitate the payment of those bills, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would have to do that because I would not know. You have to go there. You don't have that knowledge yourself as to how that all came down with the money. So, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And then particularly important, if you rented or borrowed any music, make sure that you're inquiring with the next person that's going to use it, the next performance, or the dealer that you got it from. Would they prefer that you remove the cuts and changes, or is this going to be done in 2 months at a different company that's doing the same production? Would they really prefer that you leave those markings intact, right? So just find out, where is this going next, what should I do with it, and try to return it in the way that they would prefer.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, yes, ask the question, because in your contract, almost certainly it says, remove all cuts and markings that you have done, unless you get permission to leave them.
Someone may be very sad if you do that.
Yes, somebody, yes. You go to, I have had that. I have had parts come to me clean, although it was clearly marked before, but they've been erased, and I've been I wish they had left it for me. So
Absolutely, right? And especially if you're dealing with a personal librarian for a particular artist, they may really, really prefer that you leave their markings in.
I am pretty sure they would.
Yeah.
prefer that.
So in any case, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope that we were able to provide some information that can at least give you a starting point and kind of a plan of attack for, you know, your full production or your concert performance or your gala or whatever may be coming your way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been lots of fun, Katie. Thank you.
Absolutely. And we wanted to take just a moment to remind you that MOLA is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And we do rely, of course, on generous donations from members and from supporters and users and things to be able to provide these resources and this content. So we really, appreciate taking a chance to visit the website. On our main page, we understand this is a pandemic, but if you're in the position at all to do so, and if you appreciate the resources and content provided, there is a how to donate button located on that homepage, and we really appreciate if you are in the position to visit it. So
Wonderful.
Thanks for taking the time, Nancy. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you. Alrighty. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.